Hi everyone, this is Sonia Lal. Welcome to the interview series, Your Child's Best Future, How to Get Your Child into a Top College and Set for a Happy, Successful Life. We're doing this interview series to learn from experts who can bring clarity to the college admissions process for high school students and their parents. Today we have the good fortune of interviewing Todd Johnson, who is author of the book BS MD Program, The Complete Guide Getting into Medical School from High School. Todd attended Northwestern University and St. Olaf College for undergraduate work and then graduated from law school at Washington University in St. Louis. He's practiced 20 years as a trial lawyer in Minnesota before he started College Admissions Partners 9 years ago. Welcome, Todd.
Welcome, Sonia. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks. And tell us a little bit about how you got involved in writing this book. It's a very unique subject area that not many people have written about.
Yeah, when I first started practicing a number of years ago, I had several students the first year and two that were interested in BSMD programs. And they had pretty good results, and they told a bunch of people, and so more and more students started to come to me for them. And I realized that there wasn't a lot of good information out there available, either on the net or in other books. And so I just decided that it would be a good idea to write a book for students that had an interest in these particular programs.
That's great. That's wonderful. And these programs, can you tell us what these programs are about? Because some people may not even be familiar with what a BSMD program is.
Sure. I mean, basically, it is applying to college and medical school right from high school. And if you're accepted into the program, it means you've got a guaranteed seat at the medical school waiting for you once you complete your undergraduate degree. A number of these programs are 8 years in length, but some of them are 7 years, and there are even a few that are 6 years. The programs that are less than 8 years, they reduce the length for the undergraduate education, and the medical school is still 4 years.
Okay, very interesting. And tell us about how competitive these programs are. These days, top college admission acceptance rates are pretty low, but I heard that these programs are even more competitive.
Yeah, these are generally considered the most competitive programs in college admissions today. The most competitive programs are running about 1% acceptance rate. The less competitive programs are about 7 or 8%. So even the less competitive programs are as competitive or more so than the Ivy Leagues. Okay,
great. And what does it take to get into one of these programs? What are they actually looking for?
There's a number of things that they want to see in a successful applicant. The first issue are, what are your grades and what classes did you take to get those grades? Typically, most of them have a minimum GPA requirement of a 3.8 unweighted GPA. Higher is better. Most of my successful students are going to be about a 3.9 plus unweighted. And taking a number of challenging courses, my typical students taking about 6 to 10 AP classes during high school, some many more, or they're involved in an IB program, that sort of thing, if it's available. Test scores are also very important. Most of the programs have minimum test scores, typically a minimum of a 1,400 out of 1,600 on the SAT or a 30 minimum on the ACT. And again, higher test scores are going to make you a more competitive candidate. So 1,450 to 1,500 on the SAT, 3233 on an ACT is going to be kind of some of the mainline programs. The most competitive programs are over 1,500 on the SAT and 34 plus on the ACT. That being said, grades and test scores only get you considered for these programs. They never get you in because everybody has very good test scores and grades to even be considered. So what gets a student in, as opposed to just being considered, is everything else. So specifically, the programs like to see students that have some healthcare-related experience. the more and regular consistent experience they'd like to see. So my typical student that's successful will have oftentimes 2-3 years of volunteering experience. It might be hospital-based, but it might also be at a nursing home or other type of facility that is caring for individuals, Ronald McDonald type house, that sort of thing. They also like to see some amount of research, and there's various ways to get that research, but preferably some sort of science research in some field of biology or chemistry, and usually a minimum of 1 summer's worth. More is great if you've got an interest in it. If you don't, that's not a real problem. But you need to have some amount of research to really be a competitive candidate. They also want to see students with doctor shadowing experience, which basically means that you just follow a doctor around, kind of understand what the life of a physician is like. So those are some of the basic sort of things, but they're also looking for students that have a pretty high level of maturity. Most students that are 17, 18 years old are not ready to make a decision on what they want to do for the rest of their life. And there's nothing wrong with that. We don't really expect 18-year-olds to have that kind of focus. But that's exactly what these programs are looking for. So if you've got a student that's really been focused on medicine all their life and for the right reasons, being able to show that is helpful as well. And then finally, some leadership activities can be in a club, it can be in what you do and how you do it. There's various ways to show that, but maturity also and leadership is a big issue. So.
Okay, great. Well, you've covered a lot of different things here. It sounds like there's a lot that needs to be done if someone wants to be competitive for one of these programs. So tell me a little bit about the difference between shadowing a doctor and volunteering at a hospital or a nursing home.
Sure. Shadowing is something you do for yourself. So you want to get information about what it's like to be a physician, what their daily life is like. And that's very important because medical schools want to make sure that students have a realistic view of being a physician. Volunteering, on the other hand, is what you do to help other people. So the real focus on volunteering is helping others. You are doing something, but the primary reason you're doing it is to help others. Both of them are important, and you need them both for BSMD programs to be considered. But the volunteering, again, is really the more critical of the issues. Medical schools nowadays want to make sure that students are going into medicine for the right reason. And basically that is that they enjoy helping people and they like helping people in this particular area. So that's why volunteering is so important, is just to show that you've got a real interest in helping people.
Okay, that makes sense. So in terms of shadowing a doctor, how long should a student shadow a doctor? Is it for a day or a week? And how do they go about
Well, I generally recommend a minimum of 40 to 60 hours. It does not need to be continuous, so you don't need to have just one solid week of shadowing. It can be a day here, a couple of days there, that sort of thing. Again, the focus is on showing that you understand what the life of a physician is like. The long hours, the missed appointments, those sorts of things. That they want students to have a realistic view of physician life. As far as how to find a physician to shadow, usually what I advise students is start with your own family. If you've got a family physician, family pediatrician, family doctor, check with them. See if they're willing to let you shadow. Explain to them that you've got this interest in medicine, that you want to understand what their life is like. And oftentimes those physicians will either say yes or they'll know somebody that is willing to work with the student. If you know people that, friends of yours that have parents that are physicians or friends of your parents that are physicians, that sort of thing, that can give you some ways to find physicians as well.
Okay, that makes sense. That's great. And what about when you volunteer at a hospital or a nursing home? I've had some students who tell me that it's very hard these days to get a position, even just to volunteer at a hospital. And do you have any recommendations on that?
Yeah, it really varies, frankly, from parts of the country. I work with a lot of students in California, and California tends to be very difficult to get a spot volunteering at a hospital outside of like a gift shop, or an information desk. And the volunteering that the BS70 programs like to see is volunteering where you've got some contact with the patients. If the student can't get into a hospital, and that's really not a problem, looking at nursing homes, for instance, tend to be just as good for most of the programs. And the reason is that nursing homes tend to be much more open to volunteering from students. They don't tend to have all the restrictions that the hospitals will often have. And students can read with the residents, they can feed them, they can just talk with them. So there's lots of different options that they can do, and they get that patient contact that is sometimes hard to get in the hospital. So.
Okay, so really getting in touch with people and helping them, that's what they're looking for. Not so much like, playing, your guitar at a nursing home or something like that.
That's okay, and I have many students that are musical and do that sort of musical involvement. What it's lacking, though, is that real patient contact. I mean, the patients are obviously, and residents are listening, but you're not having that one-on-one contact with them. So playing the instrument in a nursing home is perfectly fine, but if that's, you need to be doing more if that's what you're doing. You need to be doing something that involves contact with the residents more intimately.
Okay, great. What about volunteering at a hospital or medical clinic outside of the country? Is there any benefit to that over doing that locally or anything like that?
Students really need to do it locally. It can be an added benefit to also do it internationally. Medicine is becoming a much smaller world, and med schools understand that, and they want students to have experiences with different types of people, different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, that sort of thing. And so if you've got some experience outside of the country volunteering, that certainly can add to it to show that you've got some cultural understanding of different peoples. It shouldn't be the only volunteering you've got, though. So it's more of a supplement than it is a replacement for volunteering more locally.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about research. You said that it's good for students to have at least one summer of research in biology or chemistry. Tell us more, is that something like a group project or an individual project? Does it have to be at a university, or can it be done at home? What do you recommend?
No, there's three basic types of research that are generally acceptable to the BS70 programs. The first is the student that does science fairs and science competitions and that sort of thing. That tends to be the most time-consuming, but if you do well at it, so you get to be a semifinalist or a finalist at ISEF or Intel, some of those competitions, that looks very impressive because med schools understand the amount of work and background that's needed to reach that level. So that's one type of research that's perfectly acceptable. The one that is most common is that students will work with professors at local colleges and universities close to where they live. And again, typically it's in a biology or chemistry field. If there's a med school, that they can get into researching with a med school professor, that obviously is fine as well. And usually that is spent working with the professor, typically during the summer, on their research, on the professor's research interest, whatever that might be. Again, the important thing about research from the BS70 programs is that it makes sure that the students understand the scientific process and how it works. So that's really what the med schools are looking for with this type of research. The third type of research that's available is that there are colleges throughout the country that have summer research programs every summer. And basically, you pay X number of dollars to go to this program for 6-7 weeks at the college, and they have you do some research, typically, again, with the professor, sometimes in group settings with other students or other grad students and that sort of thing. That sort of program is all right, but the fact that you have to pay for it means it's not quite as strong as just arranging your own research, because colleges understand, again, that if you're just paying for something, that's more of an indication of that your family can afford it rather than, your own interest and background in doing the research. So.
Okay, great. That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much for that. Can you tell us a little bit about, GPA, and you mentioned 3.9 as an unweighted GPA that would be strong for a med program. Can you tell us, in terms of GPA in classes, are there certain classes that medical school programs want the student to take? Like, for example, would they want a student to have taken an elective in anatomy and physiology or organic chemistry or something, or does it not matter?
In general terms, colleges, and specifically the BSMD programs, like to see a year of each of the 3 core subjects. So a year of chemistry, a year of biology, a year of physics. And a number of them actually require that as one of the criteria to be considered. Usually at least one, if not more than one of those, is at the AP level. Now, colleges understand that just because of scheduling, you can't necessarily do all APs and all the sciences and do all the other required courses that schools or high schools require. And that's fine. But basically, they want some indication that you've got a strong interest in the sciences and you've taken all the sciences that you possibly can, given the availability at your high school. Taking classes like anatomy and physiology and organic chemistry, if it's offered at the high school level, is okay, but certainly not expected, because most high schools don't have those sorts of offerings. But even if they do, the BSMD programs really don't care that much about it, because you're going to have to take that course again anyway once you're in college and or medical school. And it's going to be at a much higher level than anything you would take in high school. So more than anything, taking those types of courses in high school is just a further indication of your interest. It doesn't make a big difference from an admission standpoint that somebody had anatomy and physiology and somebody didn't. If it's not available, it's not a big deal.
Okay. That's really, really helpful. Thank you.
The one other thing I would mention is some form of calculus is absolutely required. I've never seen a student admitted to one of these programs without calculus. It doesn't really seem to make any difference whether it's A, B, or B, C, but they need to have one of the calculuses by the time they graduate.
Oh, okay. Well, that's really good to know. And if they don't get to that during high school, if they take it over the summer at a community college, does that count?
Yeah, they certainly can. I have a lot of students that will take classes during the summer just because of scheduling conflicts that they have at their school during the school year. And whether it's taken, through an online class that's an accredited online class, or a community college, or one of the other local colleges where they happen to reside, doesn't matter a whole lot as long as they get the class taken.
Okay, great. What about in terms of testing? I know you mentioned the SAT or the ACT. I wonder, are there any other tests that they appreciate students having taken, like an SAT subject test or an AP exam in a certain area or anything?
The AP exams, they really don't care. They want to see the AP classes, but the AP tests and scores really don't mean much from an admission standpoint. as far as the subject tests, about a third of the BSMD programs require subject tests. Typically, it's going to be two. Usually, it's A Math and A Science. And usually what that means is Math Level 2 and either biology or chemistry. There are a few programs that require chemistry, so to keep all of your options open, I will often have students take the chemistry subject test if they feel like they're able to do well on it. There are some programs that like to see biology, but they'll take chemistry. So chemistry is going to work either way.
Okay, great. Excellent. And these need to be completed by when? Is it by the end of junior year or is it the beginning of senior year?
All testing ideally is done by end of junior year. If you take it early in the senior year, it can work. The problem is that the applications for BSMDs go in earlier than traditional applications. So usually they're due between November 1 and December 1. So if you're looking at taking a November test, it's going to probably be too late for most of the programs.
Oh, I see. But September, October would be okay, though.
September, October, particularly if it's early October, yes.
Okay. Okay, great. And you mentioned maturity. I assume that maturity is something that they look for in recommendation letters from teachers.
They certainly look for it there, yes. But it's also things like your volunteering experience. I'll often see students that will just call me up and say, I've done lots of volunteering. I did this day for a Relay for Life, and I did 2 days for a cancer thing, and I did 3 days for heart, and I did, it's kind of all over the board. That is a typical sort of approach of many students, but it doesn't illustrate a lot of maturity. What illustrates more maturity is the student that volunteers at a facility every week, week in, week out, for 2 years.
Okay.
So
you're talking
when
about
I talk to students
for 2 years. Okay.
Yep. And again, it only needs to be, if you're doing even an hour or two a week in the volunteering, that's usually sufficient. You don't have to spend 8-10 hours, because colleges again understand that students have limited time. But the student that goes in every week for an hour or two, and does it 45, 50 weeks a year, that's somebody who really likes helping, but it also is somebody that is very focused and understands that I'm doing a good job here and I'm going to keep doing this job at this particular place. And like I said, it's those subtle sort of things often that will reflect on the maturity of the student. Maturity also can come through in some of the essays, in what the student writes the essay about and how they write the essay. So I'm always cognizant of that when I'm working with the students on the essays, of keeping in mind, is this topic, is this writing going to contribute to making the student look mature, or is it going to make them look in some other way?
Okay, good. What about interviews? Do most of these programs require interviews?
Some of the undergraduate programs do. All of the medical schools, with one exception, do require medical student interviews. Brown University, in their program, does not require a med school interview, but every other med school requires an interview if the student's being considered. And these are interviews on the campus of the medical school. So for the student that does very well and gets multiple interviews, there can also be a lot of traveling that takes place in kind of the January to March phase of senior year. So that's also something to kind of keep in mind when you're applying. If you're applying to multiple programs, that if you're successful, you can end up with a lot of traveling in the spring of senior year.
Okay, so January to March, they may be getting requested to come over to campus for interviews.
Yep. Yeah, some of the interviews are a little earlier, a little later than that, but the vast majority in that January through March period of senior year.
Okay, so that means that if they get a request for an interview, that the school is seriously considering them.
Correct.
Okay.
But not everybody that interviews gets in. Your odds of, on average, I looked at it varies again from program to program, but on average, about 1 in 4 students that interviews actually gets into a program in most places.
Okay, so the interview is an important part of the process then.
The interview is absolutely critical because they want to make sure that they're admitting the right students for their program. Yep.
Okay. And what about leadership in clubs? Can you tell us, is there anything special that they're looking for, or is it the same kind of thing, just commitment to an extracurricular for a few years, or anything else there we should know?
Yeah, I mean, certainly having more commitment is something they like to see. Students often think, well, I got to be the president of the club or vice president. I mean, that's certainly a way to show leadership, but there are other ways too. I've had a number of young men who have been in Boy Scouts and have gotten to the rank of Eagle Scout, or young women that are in Girl Scouts that get their Gold Award. Both of those also evidence a pretty high level of leadership. And colleges and medical schools recognize that sort of leadership as well. So it's not just I'm the president of a club that's necessary. There's other ways to show leadership too.
Okay, great. Now, in terms of figuring out the list of colleges that have these programs, let's say you are applying to these programs, how do you narrow down where to apply to? I know there's over 100 programs, is that right, throughout the country?
Yep. There's about 120 colleges that have some association with a medical school. I mean, when I'm working with students, I'm looking at a couple of issues. One, I'm looking at what is their grades and test scores, and just that basic academic background. And I've been doing this long enough that I know with this sort of grade and test score, you will be a competitive candidate at this type of school. And so that's kind of the first screening criteria. The second thing is, what is the student interested in? I mean, where do you want to be physically? Location in the country, size of the colleges, those types of issues. And then also, some programs are looking for some very specific things. So there's a program at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, for instance, that is a research-based program. So if I've got a student that's had a lot of research, 3-4 years of research at high school, that sort of student may be a good candidate for that program and the focus of that program. So again, there's lots of different things we look at in trying to determine what is the best program for a student to apply to.
Okay. Now, I've heard that some of these programs do not require the student to take the MCAT, and that's one of the great benefits of these programs is you don't have to worry so much about, preparing and passing the MCAT and all of that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Are there only some colleges that do that and most of them require it still, or how does that work?
Yeah, most require the MCAT. There are some that do not, and obviously most people would love to get into those programs that do not, because it is a big test and it takes a lot to prepare for. The programs that do require it, however, for the most part, require a level of placement on the MCAT that is at or a little below what they would normally expect through the regular admissions process. So, for instance, if a school would normally, in the MCAT is scored on a strange scale, but 500 is an average, basically. Now, if a school normally has students that get let's say a 508, and they're applying to med school through the traditional route, they'll often make the MCAT requirement for students in the program like a 507, a 508. So students need to get a decent MCAT score, but they don't need to worry about getting the highest possible MCAT score. If you're going through applying to med school through the traditional route, you really want to get the highest possible score, because that's a major issue in med school admissions is the MCAT score through the traditional route. So you still have to take it for a number of the BSMD programs, but again, the requirements tend to be a little lower than they do if you're going the traditional route. So that can be a bit of a benefit too.
Okay. So for example, the example that you gave, if they had a 507 as their cutoff, if a student was already in the accelerated program, about what would be the range that they would need to meet for, staying in the program?
They might say a 505 or 506.
Oh, so it's not a whole lot of difference, it's a little bit. Okay.
Not a lot, but keep in mind that, again, these are minimum scores as far as the traditional approach. So just because they will accept a 507 through the traditional approach, their average may be a 510.
Okay. Got it. And altogether, is there anything else that the student in one of these programs has to be aware of, like they have to maintain a certain GPA or anything like that?
Yeah, most of the programs do require GPAs. Typically, it's a 3.5 GPA in the college. And again, if you're applying to med school through the traditional approach, 3.5 is really the minimum test or grade you would want to have, and preferably much higher. 3.7, 3.8 is much more preferable. So, again, while you have to maintain a GPA, it's much easier to maintain a 3.5 GPA in most of these schools than to get a 3.7 or 3.8. So what happens is, yes, the students have certain minimum GPAs, they have certain minimum MCAT scores at many of the programs, but again, they're less than they would want to have if they took the traditional approach. So they don't have to worry as much about prepping for the MCAT. They don't have to worry so much necessarily about their grades. So they can take great classes that they might not have otherwise looked at because they're concerned, well, maybe I'm going to get a B and I don't want to be in that class. It's not as big of an issue with the BSMD programs because they've got that minimum requirement. Again, the minimum's not that high. So.
Okay. And what if a student does change their mind and they decide either they don't want to go to medical school or maybe they want to apply to another medical school? Is that possible?
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's two separate issues. None of these can bind the student. In other words, if a student changes their mind and decides they want to go to law school or grad school or whatever, rather than medical school, they can do it with every one of the programs. So dropping out and going into something else is perfectly acceptable. I will tell you it doesn't happen a lot simply because the real focus when they're admitting students is making sure they've got students that are committed and aren't going to drop out. So the med schools are really focused on that issue when they're making decisions on who to admit. As far as applying to other medical schools, most of the BSMD programs basically say if you apply out to another medical school other than the one you're already admitted to, you lose your guaranteed acceptance to that medical school. There are some programs that say if you want to apply out, go ahead and apply out. If you get in someplace else, you can go someplace else. But the majority of the BSMDs say you can apply out, but if you do, you're going to lose your guaranteed spot.
Okay, that makes sense, definitely. And one more question for you, Todd. Some of the students that I work with wonder about, whether they should go to those programs in the Caribbean for medical school, because if they don't get into a program in the United States, one of these accelerated programs, should they go there? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's an option that I will talk to students about. I generally think there are better options available. Beyond the BSMD programs, there are what are called BSDO programs, where students get a Doctor of Osteopathy degree rather than a medical doctor degree. And as far as practice and specialties, they're pretty much exactly the same. I mean, you can do almost all the same residencies. You can do the same specialty practice with the DO degree. So that's a secondary option if they don't get into an MD program. Otherwise, frankly, in my experience, I think they're probably better off for most students going the traditional route and just spending the 4 years in college and applying to med school through the traditional route. If they don't get in then I think taking a look at the Caribbean is an option. But the pass rates on the Caribbean schools really varies, but there's a huge dropout rate with a number of those Caribbean medical schools. And so they can work out, but they can also be a big problem for a lot of students. So I think you need to really go in with eyes wide open before you go the Caribbean medical school route.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Good. This has been a great interview. Is there any other advice you would like to pass on before we end?
No, these are great programs if you can get in. You can get early research experience with med school professors as part of it. Some of the programs have MCAT preparation as part of the program, all built in because they want these students to pass. But frankly, they're not for everybody. You need to be a very strong student, and you need to truly be committed to medicine. If you're not sure, you're thinking, well, maybe this, maybe that, these are not the programs for you.
Okay, so you're sure that you have to show all those things, and you have to have that, self-confidence that this is what you want to do the rest of your life. So if you're not sure, this would not be in place. Okay.
Right. And for the student that has known since they were, 10 years old, they want to be a doctor, these can be great options.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just the fact that you don't have to go through the whole process of applying again is a huge relief. You have to go through much less anxiety and all of that. So it's understandable why so many students would want to go to these programs. Definitely. Great. Well, thank you so much, Todd. It's been wonderful to get your advice, and we look forward to students visiting your website, collegeadmissionspartners.com, to learn more about how they can get your help in this process. So thank you so much.
Yep. Well, it's good talking to you, Sonia. All right. Bye-bye.